Since their inception, the EA UFC games have always struggled with balancing the expectations of realism that come naturally from being marketed and sold as a simulation game with the innate problem of having to create a game that plays well and is fun for a vast majority of users. The developers are constantly pulled from multiple sides as the casual community clamors for things that are viewed as completely ridiculous by the hardcore community or the simulation community, while the competitive community simultaneously tries to argue that both sides can be damned and balance is the most important. With every patch, update, and new game that is released, the coin is seemingly flipped to another side that nobody even knew existed. The argument is one that will most likely never end because everybody wants something different out of these games. So today, that's not what I'm going to look at. Instead, let's take a step back and look at the facts of this game. Today, I want to statistically analyze what UFC 4 gets right and wrong compared to the reality of MMA. This is not a commentary on what I believe should change in the game, although that may be something I cover in a separate video. This is purely an analysis of the game at its purest form, within a complete vacuum, and only being compared to the sport in which it claims to represent. Today, I'm going to break down every part of UFC 4, from the striking, to the grappling, to the damage system, to the clinch. Everything is going to be analyzed and put under a microscope. This is going to be a long video, so I've sectioned it up. Feel free to skip around as you please. Timestamps are on the video bar and in the description. So, without further ado, this is... Before breaking anything down, it is important to decide what this game should be scrutinized for. In this case, I will be putting it in comparison to real MMA. But what does that mean exactly? As for the purposes of this video, I will be pulling experience from myself, other high-level players in the community, development blogs, and any other official or anecdotal information that I can find and verify in terms of the game. In real life, I will be using examples strictly from the UFC. As the game is licensed to create a realistic simulation of the UFC brand, I will therefore be only using examples from that brand. This will also give a good ground to go off of stat-wise, as UFC stats and Fight Metric are phenomenal databases and great ways to cross-check the game with real life. That being said, let's start off where every fight starts off, on the feet. Striking in UFC 4 is based off a combination queuing system. Quite simply put, you press the buttons for the combination you'd like to throw, and there are different levels at which you can be successful in throwing what you attempted. The first level of combination is what is referred to as a hard combo. These are combinations listed in the fighter's moveset. These are all based on a fighter's combination levels, but the basic ones are things all fighters have. Basic two combination strikes, such as jab cross or jab lead body hook. These are combinations that fighters can throw no matter what as long as they have enough stamina, landing on the block or not, that will come out in successful combination with hardly any downtime in between. The second level of combination is referred to as a soft combo. These are combinations not listed in the fighter's moveset because it is not available at the level of combination that they have, but logically can be thrown because it alternates punches or kicks in a left-right variation. Something like a jab straight lead hook rear uppercut, an often utilized combination in the higher levels of gameplay, is not available to all fighters. However, they may all throw it. The difference is that if their strikes hit the block, their combination may be slowed down or not come out at all. The third level of combination is referred to as a combo chain. These are combinations not listed in the game at all, but ones that can be thrown by connecting two different combinations together. This is how you see high-level players throw 5 to 7 piece combinations without seemingly slowing down at all. The requirement for this is that all the strikes from the first combination that is being connected to the second combination land. They cannot miss or land on the block, or the entire queue will end. So, I just described 3 levels of combinations that have different access points, and if you are somebody who played the first 2 UFC games, you're probably yelling at your screen right now. And you're absolutely correct for doing so, because what the f***? Fighters are never restricted to a certain list of combinations in real life. Combinations can be extended into 10, even 15 punches at times. As well as this, fighters are not restricted to throwing from alternate sides. They tend to choose to do so because it is a good way to generate power, but it is not required. Some fights see fighters throwing with the same side multiple times in a row and still generating power to do so. The key here is the question of balance and still having the game look reasonable. As I mentioned briefly, people who played the older games will still remember that UFC 2 especially was renowned for its free flow combination system. As long as you had stamina left in your bar and you could input the combination successfully, you could essentially throw whatever you wanted. It didn't matter how long it was, how ridiculous it looked, or what the strikes were. You could throw almost anything at any point at any time, so why not do this now? Well, the answer is simple. The developers chose a realistic look and feel in this situation. The meta, as it is called, or most effective tactic available in UFC 2 was to throw double head kicks. You would see people end every combination with a rear head kick and then a lead one. Although this may be technically possible, I can't remember the last time I saw it happen in a UFC fight, and even if it did, it certainly wasn't after every combination. The developers figured that limiting the use of combinations would end up benefiting the game in the long run as they revamped the striking system for UFC 3 and stuck with it through UFC 4. So, does UFC 4 end up matching real life in this case? Well, not really. It's actually quite unrealistic. Although most combinations that are thrown in-game are the most common ones from real life, the lack of ability to create your own combinations, extend them far, or chain multiple strikes from the same side, as well as the fact that fighters' combination levels are not commonly updated to reflect their ability in real life, causes me to say that this does not reflect real life. As I stated earlier in the video and want to reiterate, this is not necessarily a bad thing, just a statement of fact. A common complaint levied at UFC 4 in specific is that the pace is too high. Simply, too many strikes are able to be thrown. This is harder to quantify as it is highly dependent on a specific person's playstyle, the amount of time spent, the fighter used, etc, etc. However, there is a baseline that can be established. Let's take Max Holloway, a fighter well known for his high volume output. Taking stats from Fight Metric on his last 5 fights, we can approximate that his significant strike attempt rate is 16.4 strikes per minute. As reported by Bleacher Report, the average UFC bout lasts about 9 minutes. We'll round this up to 10 for the sake of ease of math. Using that, there should be approximately 164 strikes per fight per fighter when using a high-volume fighter. As most of the competitive community uses high-volume fighters, and I've played thousands of matches with a lot of different players, I'd say the average strike rate after 2 rounds averages out to between 80 to 100 strikes per round. This would put the average between 160 and 200 strikes per fight, with the lower end of that spectrum being decently close to Max's rate, and the higher end being pretty far out there. Understanding that Max is an absolute freak of nature and a complete anomaly when it comes to striking, I'm going to rate the pace of UFC 4 as somewhat realistic. It is not as unrealistic as the combination locking of the game, for example, but most fighters have a much lower striking rate attempt unless they're extremely high level, and that is not particularly well reflected within the game. The block. The bane of simulation players. Don't even get me started. Anyway, the block is a really complicated system in UFC 4 that, to be honest, I really don't have the time to get into right now because I'm 3 pages into a Google document at 7 p.m. on a school night and I have a test tomorrow. Anyway, go watch Romero17's video on the subject if you want a deep dive. I'll give a basic rundown and give my opinion. The easiest way the block system can be described is one of overcommitting to shots. When throwing a strike, the block will adjust to block that strike. If strikes of differing variations are thrown, the block will end up not being able to keep up, and certain strikes will end up getting through the guard. Again, that is a massive oversimplification, but come on, I don't have the time or the patience to get into a 30-minute discussion with sim players about exactly how the block works and why UFC 3 was better anyway. I'm going to rate the block in this game as pretty realistic. It's not perfect, there is still no option for front versus side block as would be ideal, and still no parries, but at the end of the day, it does a fine job in emulating fights in a way that is realistic, especially when being compared to fights like Poirier vs. Hooker. Honestly, this one is pretty easy. People take too much damage in this game. Jeremy Stephens vs. Gilbert Melendez and Forrest Petz vs. Sammy Morgan hold the record for most knockdowns in a single bout at a grand whopping total of 5. So yeah, I don't think many people are going to argue with me that you shouldn't be getting 10 knockdowns in a fight because you finish people. This is, however, an interesting topic. The reason that knockdowns are so prevalent is due to a couple of things, but mainly it's the ground and pound system. First of all, GNP is way too unreliable to stop in critical situations. Sometimes it's a single knockdown into 20 seconds of GNP and the fight is over. Other times, the person is in the matrix, slipping every shot. The system is way too forgiving and willing to force players into GNP scenarios when after a certain threshold, it should just be a knockout period. So this one, I'm going to rate as unrealistic. The footwork in UFC 4 is somewhat simple and decently primitive, although it can get advanced with the correct player. The left stick moves the player in 4 directions, and that's about it. The two fighters automatically face each other like glue, so there is essentially no option for angle creation. The use of lunges, pivot lunges, and stiff arm retreats does add depth to this though. Pivot lunges are a new addition to competitive play that I and a few others are particularly fond of, and they have done wonders in expanding the movement system in new and interesting ways. Go watch Romero's video on it, it's pretty fantastic. As well as this, there are certain fighters, namely Dominic Cruz, TJ Dillashaw, and Cody Garbrandt, that have certain unique moves that you can use to exacerbate their skill set. The main issue with footwork in UFC 4 is that it's too linear, too fast in some areas, and too slow in others. The linear issue is mainly due to the fact that fighters automatically face each other with almost no readjustment period, although this isn't a problem that can be likely solved until VR UFC comes into play due to the limiting factor of the controller. It does take away several variables of real-life footwork though, such as striking from different angles and circling around the cage quickly without lunge spamming and looking like an absolute moron or a jackass depending on who you ask. It also takes away different footwork patterns that could be implemented, such as V-stepping or shuffling. Footwork also has the issue of forward versus backward movement. When moving forward, you expose yourself to vulnerability. This means that you are slower while throwing, trying to cut off the cage, and backwards movement will always be much safer. This causes the most effective style to be backing up consistently and waiting for the opponent to throw, something that is generally unrealistic. This also ends up controlling the camera angle, something that is critical when trying to hit clean shots on high-level players. Overall, the footwork can have a modicum of depth, but it is overshadowed by the blatant abuse of some of its systems and a lack of genuinely balanced options when trying to compete at a high level. So I'm going to rate this as neutral. I just want to take this time to share this meme. It is completely irrelevant to my rating on the realistic aspects of the game, but it's funny, and I want to thank you for watching this far into the video. Okay, so those are the main components of striking. Combinations, pace, block, damage, and footwork are the 5 main aspects of the striking game. So, let's move on to the clinch. As a general rule, the clinch in this game aimed to be a renovation of the UFC 3 clinch, just how UFC 3 striking updated UFC 2 to be much more fluid. In some ways, they succeeded. In other ways, not so much, something we'll talk about as we keep going through the video. However, the transitions in the clinch are actually fairly well done. Movement in the clinch is constant, and there's always a way to get to another position and keep working from the clinch. The push and pull feeling, however, is almost completely non-existent. The dominant player has almost every conceivable advantage in transitioning in the clinch, while the submissive player has one option, a transition to single under that can be easily interrupted by a transition or strike from the dominant player. Due to this severe flaw, I am going to rate the transitioning in the clinch as neutral. Probably one of the most controversial topics after the release of UFC 4, positions in the clinch. It's no secret that this one is pretty ugly. The most detrimental of these that is missing, obviously, is the double underhooks. Per Jeff Harrower on Reddit, a former gameplay lead on the EA UFC games and one of the most beloved people in the whole community before he left for Sony Santa Monica, the developers worked on positions in which transitioning and striking was active and control positions were given less time to be worked on. This means that even in positions in the game, options or ways to get there are severely limited. The lack of double unders, a neutral single collar where one person is not dominant and both can work, and a lack of options against the cage means that this one is definitely unrealistic. The takedown system was something that really ended up shining in UFC 4, and nobody really saw it coming. It was completely revamped from the ground up, and honestly, I think it is quite fantastic. There are multiple takedown options from every position in the game, chains in order to attempt multiple takedown sequences in a row, bails, and really everything you can think of. I don't have much to complain about here. The takedown system is honestly fantastic. The only issue is that sometimes a few of the takedowns are not possible to deny on reaction, leading to issues that I'll talk about in the next segment. Despite that flaw, the takedowns from the clinch are very, very well done, and I'm going to rate them as realistic. So there are a few submissions that can be attempted from the clinch. As for the purposes of this section, I will only be talking about attempting them, as I'm going to talk about the submission system itself in the grappling section of the video. All of them are decently simple to attempt and defend. You attempt them by pressing a specific button combination and they will initiate, and the player defending has to hold R2, RT if you're on Xbox. Unfortunately, these submissions are all essentially impossible to deny on reaction. This leads to huge issues, especially with the standing guillotine. As everybody knows, the standing guillotine is the best submission in the game, and unfortunately, it is near instant to attempt. The use of the standing guillotine, combined with the hip toss attempt from single collar both being impossible to react to, creates what boils down to a guessing game, or something that is referred to by high-level players as a 50-50 scenario. Either you take the 50% chance it'll be a takedown and block low, or the 50% chance it'll be a guillotine and block high. Either way, you'll be wrong 50% of the time and put into an extremely compromising scenario. Good premise for the submissions from the clinch, not so great execution. This is a flaw inherent to the system, but not one that isn't fixable, and besides it, there are no big issues with the submission attempts from the clinch. For that reason, I'm going to rate the clinch submissions as neutral. 2 down, 1 to go, we're making good time here. I might end up sleeping tonight after all. Anyway, grappling's up next. Let's start on a positive note. As I said in the clinch section, the takedown system in this game is robust and quite honestly fantastic. Takedown defense is responsive, there are multiple ways to attempt takedowns, bails, and chain attempts together. To be honest, it is absolutely the best takedown system that there has ever been in an MMA game. I don't think I'm making a controversial statement by saying that. The only issue here is that of stamina. Players can shoot a massive amount of takedowns without becoming more gassed than their opponent. Given that flaw, the takedown system as a whole I'm going to rate as pretty realistic. This is largely one of the biggest blunders EA has made in terms of the ground game. The idea of grapple advantage is simplistic in nature. It contains punching on the ground or faking on the ground, which makes transitions go faster. The large issue here is that grapple advantage only really takes effect once the bar is maxed out. Once this happens, transitions are extremely fast and basically undeniable unless you are guessing when they are going to happen. So what happens is you get people baby punching on the ground over and over and faking transitions like a spaz until they get their bar to full, in which case they get an instant pass. I don't think you need to be an expert in grappling to know that this is not how this works. Given the large issues with this system and the result it has had on the grappling system, turning it largely into a waiting game, I'm going to rate this as unrealistic. Possibly the most controversial update to UFC 4 was the rehaul of the ground and pound system. Whereas previous games allowed you to be postured up ad infinitum unless you or your opponent moved, this game gives you a certain amount of time, dependent on your stamina, until you are automatically pulled down as long as your opponent is holding R2. The strikes in UFC 4 on the ground are also a lot more fluid and faster, which is good, but they also cause the ground and pound defense to be somewhat of a guessing game. You cannot really react to which type of strike is coming and attempt to defend it intelligently, so you are left to guess which strike is coming. As well as this, it is far too easy to get a flip on defense in ground and pound. Slipping or framing one strike can often get the defending fighter into mount or back sitting, where the offensive fighter will have lost all their stamina and be available for an easy submission. This has been seen to happen in high-level fights, so it is an issue at all levels of the game. Given the fact that the striking has become more fluid and more like real life, as well as more transitioning options being available, but the defense is abysmal, I'm going to rate this as decently unrealistic. It's not inherently horrible, but has major flaws that hold it back from being both a good game mechanic and being comparable to real life. This was the other major revamp of UFC 4, and one that is unanimously unpopular among competitive players. Let's get one thing straight. Minigames have absolutely no place in a simulation-based fighting game. There should be no part of UFC 4 that has any minigame in it, especially not something as important as submissions. There isn't really much to say about the system because what they went with is so abhorrently bad of an option that I can't even begin to talk about it. MMA games need to do better with this. Transition-based submissions are the only way that the submission game will ever be respected or feasible in a competitive level past the skill required to beat somebody else at a mobile game. This is completely unrealistic, and quite frankly, an embarrassment to MMA. Considering that the owner of ESFL is a black belt in BJJ, and the developers allegedly train BJJ in accordance with every game released, it is shocking that EA decided to go this route. And that's it. I think that this covered most of the things in UFC 4 that are somewhat comparable to real life. It is difficult to talk about things like tracking because they're inherent to video games and cannot be brought up in comparison to real life because real life tracking just doesn't exist. Hopefully, however, this gave you a new perspective on the reality of the game we all play. If you enjoyed this video, please do leave a like, it really helps out the channel. I appreciate you all watching the video and I will see you next time.